You really think you can fix this mess? Robert Hayes' voice echoed across the glass-walled conference room, sharp and incredulous, carrying the weight of his title and the authority of decades in the boardroom. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off polished chrome fixtures and reflecting across the dark mahogany table where a dozen executives sat, pens poised and notepads ready, their eyes darting between the tall, confident CEO and the young analyst who dared to challenge him. Aisha Carter, 25, the youngest executive on the team and one of the few women of color in the upper floors of Hayes Industries, adjusted the strap of her sleek leather briefcase and lifted her gaze to meet Robert's, unwavering and precise. Her dark brown eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the spreadsheets projected onto the large screen behind her, every figure meticulously highlighted, every trend graph labeled with exact percentages and margin estimates. The room's hum of quiet murmurs and the soft tapping of pens paused as Robert leaned back, his tailored navy suit crisp, his silver hair catching the light in a way that suggested both age and authority, and let out a half-laugh that carried a challenge. You're telling me these numbers matter? That all my projections, all my forecasts, hinge on what this young analyst is pointing out? The words were punctuated by the subtle click of his cufflinks, deliberate and slow, meant to command attention and silence dissent. Aisha's lips pressed together in a subtle line, her posture straight, hands resting lightly on the sleek glass surface in front of her, the faint hum of her laptop the only audible counterpoint to the tension. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat, didn't shift in her seat. Instead, she gestured to the projected spreadsheet with a calm, deliberate sweep of her hand, drawing attention to the anomalies in revenue allocation and risk exposure that Robert's team had overlooked in their rush to close the quarterly merger deal. The air felt charged, dense with expectation, as each executive leaned slightly forward, some narrowing their eyes, others blinking rapidly as if forcing themselves to focus through a sudden haze of uncertainty. The sunlight glinted off the rim of Robert's glasses as he adjusted them, tilting his head, his usual smirk faltering for the briefest instant as he considered the sheer audacity of Aisha's challenge. "Do you realize," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "that standing here, in front of the entire senior staff, pointing out flaws in my strategy, could be disastrous for your career?" Aisha's response was measured, her voice steady though barely audible above the room's hush. "I understand the stakes, sir, and I've triple-checked the data. These projections, if left unchecked, could expose the company to unforeseen liabilities. The models don't lie." There was a pause, pregnant with tension, as Robert's gaze flickered across the faces of his board members. Some shifted uncomfortably, others suppressed small gasps. The faint whir of the air conditioning seemed louder, the sunlight catching on Aisha's polished shoes, a subtle shine reflecting the calm professionalism she exuded despite the undercurrent of intimidation. Robert's eyebrows arched slightly, the crease between them deepening as he processed the statement, his mouth opening slightly and then closing again, the smirk replaced with a measured, incredulous silence. Aisha took a slow breath, maintaining eye contact, letting the weight of her expertise and the clarity of her findings speak louder than any plea or apology ever could, her hand hovering briefly over the laptop trackpad as if ready to advance to the next set of charts, each depicting risk exposure, projected margins, and contingency forecasts with precision only years of rigorous analysis could produce. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable, the delicate balance between challenge and consequence hanging like a fragile crystal chandelier above the polished table, refracting the sunlight into tiny prisms of suspended tension that danced across the dark carpet. Robert Hayes' hand twitched slightly, a subtle tremor unnoticed by all but the closest of observers, and then he leaned forward, resting one arm on the table, his gaze fixed on the highlighted cells that revealed the discrepancies Aisha had painstakingly uncovered. The silence stretched, elongated by the tick of the conference room clock and the distant hum of elevators passing in the building's core. Aisha's heart maintained its steady rhythm, her mind calm, every thought aligned with the task at hand, projecting confidence and meticulous preparation, embodying the principle that competence and precision can command respect even before words are fully spoken. The faint clicking of pens resumed, tentative and cautious, as executives began to murmur quietly among themselves, weighing the validity of her observations against the authority of their CEO. Robert's lips parted again, but no words came out immediately, his usual rapid-fire cadence replaced by a contemplative stillness, the kind that made the room lean in, sensing that a turning point, subtle yet profound, was unfolding. Aisha's gaze remained unwavering, her presence measured, confident, a living statement that knowledge and preparation could shift the balance in a room dominated by hierarchy. The young black executive asserting herself not through volume or aggression, but through exacting expertise and unshakable composure. Each detail, she presented a beacon of competence that demanded acknowledgement and quietly unsettled the perceived power structure she had dared to confront. The morning air outside the headquarters carried a crisp chill, the kind that hinted at early autumn but still held traces of the lingering summer warmth. Aisha Carter walked briskly down the polished corridor toward the analyst wing, her black pumps clicking softly against the marble floor, echoing faintly through the quiet hallways of Hayes Industries. The office spaces on either side were filled with the muted hum of computers and the low murmur of focused colleagues, all unaware of the confrontation that had just taken place in the conference room above. Her tailored gray blazer fit perfectly over a crisp white blouse, and the sleek lines of her pencil skirt emphasized her professionalism rather than any attempt to attract attention. She carried her leather briefcase with a deliberate grip, the smooth surface worn slightly from weeks of commuting between client meetings, workshops, and late nights analyzing financial statements. As she passed the glass walls of the open plan office, her eyes briefly met those of her peers, who were immersed in spreadsheets, muted video calls, and phone conferences. Aisha allowed herself a subtle, private acknowledgement of the mental calculations that ran constantly in her mind, the same ones that had guided her through years of academic rigor, summer internships at prestigious firms, and relentless self-study after long days at work. She remembered the countless nights she had spent poring over corporate reports, market analyses, and legal frameworks, long before she had ever stepped into a room with the executives she now observed. Her path led to a quiet corner office, assigned to the most promising analysts, where the sunlight filtered in through the large windows, creating faint geometric patterns across the polished oak desk and the neatly stacked files. Aisha set down her briefcase and pulled out a folder containing additional research, double-checking every number, cross-referencing her assumptions against multiple databases to ensure that her presentation remained flawless. Around her, the office remained steady in rhythm, the quiet clicks of keyboards and low hum of monitors creating a sense of controlled order. Despite the chaos and intensity of the morning meeting, Aisha maintained a calm exterior, drawing strength from her preparation and the certainty that knowledge, not bravado, would dictate the next steps. She reviewed the projections for the merger again, confirming the subtle discrepancies in revenue streams, expense allocations, and risk factors that might have gone unnoticed by anyone less meticulous. Outside, the sun moved slowly across the skyline, the light casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, hinting at the passage of time and the steady rhythm of corporate life that never paused, never waited for indecision or hesitation. Aisha took a deep breath, allowing the natural light to warm her slightly chilled hands, a reminder of the tangible reality outside the glass walls. She straightened, smoothing the folds of her blazer and adjusting her collar, and then paused to observe the cityscape beyond, the streets bustling with cars, the distant hum of urban life, the occasional honk or the roar of an engine punctuating the morning calm. Her mind, however, remained centered on the task at hand, the analysis that could prevent costly mistakes, protect shareholders, and ensure that the integrity of the project remained intact. As she organized her materials, she reflected briefly on her journey. The scholarships earned through hard work, the mentors who had guided her in her earliest internships, the countless hours spent learning the language of finance, law, and corporate strategy, all of which now coalesced into the poised professional who had just challenged a CEO and remained standing, composed and resolute. The corridor outside her office remained quiet, the sound of her shoes against the polished marble floor a steady metronome, marking the transition from tense confrontation to thoughtful preparation, each step deliberate, each breath measured. As she prepared for the follow-up meetings that would determine the direction of the merger and her continued recognition in a corporate world that often overlooked those who carried their competence quietly, yet effectively, through each challenge. The conference room waited in quiet anticipation as the next wave of staff entered, their footsteps soft against the thick carpet, the faint rustle of papers and subtle clinks of coffee cups providing a delicate background rhythm to the tense atmosphere. Robert Hayes, seated at the head of the table, adjusted his cufflinks once again, the polished metal catching the afternoon sunlight that poured through the towering windows, casting long reflections across the dark wood surface. His expression remained composed, but the faint furrow of his brow hinted at the careful consideration he was giving to the young analyst who had challenged his projections earlier. Across the table, Aisha Carter collected herself, placing her folder neatly in front of her, the smooth leather of her briefcase resting against the side of her chair, a silent testament to her meticulous attention to detail. The analysts and junior executives who had just entered glanced toward the head of the table, noting the subtle shift in posture from Robert, the change in his usual rhythm, the way his normally confident gaze lingered on Aisha as he scanned the figures displayed on the projection screen. The charts glowed softly, each bar and line carefully color-coded, the percentages and dollar amounts precise to the last decimal, evidence of hours spent cross-referencing databases, verifying sources, and ensuring the integrity of every number presented. Aisha's fingers rested lightly on the table as she reviewed her notes, a calm center amid the heightened attention, each breath measured, deliberate, syncing with the slow tick of the wall clock that seemed louder in the charged silence. The other executives shifted in their seats, some leaning in with curiosity, others exchanging subtle glances, acknowledging the weight of the information being brought to the table by someone so young and seemingly at odds with the established hierarchy. Outside the glass walls of the building, the city pulsed with life, distant traffic and the hum of construction mingling with the natural sounds of the urban landscape, a stark contrast to the contained intensity within the conference room. Aisha recalled the journey that had led her here, the scholarships earned with tireless dedication, late nights spent studying market models, countless internships and mentorships that had shaped her analytical skills, all culminating in this very moment where her knowledge would be evaluated against decades of corporate authority. Her hand moved slightly to adjust the laptop, the subtle motion revealing a sense of calm precision, the exactness of her preparation evident in the smooth transition between pages of data and detailed annotations. The room's lighting accentuated the soft angles of her face and the sharpness of her expression, reflecting the inner resolve that allowed her to present complex financial analyses without hesitation or uncertainty. Robert shifted his chair slightly, the leather creaking under the subtle weight of movement, his gaze momentarily narrowing as he examined the spreadsheets, a flicker of recognition passing over his face as the depth of Aisha's insight became apparent. The senior board members began to murmur quietly among themselves, the sound measured, careful not to interrupt, but enough to convey the gradual understanding that the information presented could not be dismissed. Aisha met Robert's eyes, steady and unwavering, conveying confidence and expertise without a single raised voice, demonstrating that authority could be challenged through intellect and preparation rather than volume or force. The soft click of the projector changing slides punctuated the otherwise silent room, each transition highlighting additional anomalies and opportunities in the financial report, reinforcing the clarity and thoroughness of Aisha's work. The sunlight shifted as the afternoon progressed, drawing longer shadows across the table, subtly emphasizing the spatial dynamics of power and attention, the room itself a stage for the unfolding evaluation of competence against established status. Each executive's subtle reactions, the careful adjustments of pens, the slight lean forward in chairs, all reflected an acknowledgement of Aisha's presence not as a passive participant, but as an active contributor whose analysis demanded recognition and consideration. The energy in the room, though quiet, was tangible, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and the unspoken realization that the usual hierarchy was being gently, yet definitively, challenged. Aisha's mind remained focused on the data, the potential implications, and the next steps, fully aware that this moment represented both an opportunity to solidify her professional credibility and a test of her composure in navigating the delicate dynamics of senior leadership observation and corporate scrutiny. The afternoon sunlight glinted off the polished surfaces, casting reflections across the meticulously organized workspace, a visual reminder of the order and precision that Aisha brought to her analysis, the very elements that allowed her to stand confidently in the presence of seasoned executives and articulate the insights that could shape the future trajectory of the merger under consideration. With the board members now quietly observing, Aisha Carter took a deep breath and opened the next section of her presentation, her movements deliberate and precise, each gesture reflecting confidence and preparation honed over years of careful study. She clicked the remote to reveal a detailed graph of projected revenue streams alongside a color-coded breakdown of expense allocations, the lines and bars aligned meticulously to highlight potential discrepancies. Robert Hayes leaned forward, the light catching the edges of his silver watch, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the visual data, momentarily suspending his previous skepticism. The room held a subtle, tense energy as the senior executives shifted in their seats, their attention caught not by the grandeur of the office or the polished veneer of authority, but by the clarity and precision with which the young analyst conveyed her findings. Aisha continued speaking, her voice calm, resonant, and measured, carefully walking the group through complex calculations, explaining the implications of each figure, and pointing out subtle yet significant errors that could impact the merger if left unaddressed. Each slide transitioned smoothly, the projected charts illuminating the room in soft light, casting reflections across the polished conference table and subtly accentuating the attentive expressions of those present. She referenced previous quarters and industry benchmarks, cross-checking each metric with historical data, and the executives began to nod subtly, their initial skepticism giving way to cautious acknowledgement. Aisha's posture remained impeccable, her fingers lightly resting on the desk when she was not pointing to the data, the faint sheen of her watch catching the sunlight and mirroring the meticulous nature of her presentation. Robert's expression shifted imperceptibly, his lips pressed in a thin line, his usual commanding presence now tempered with careful consideration, a subtle recognition of the expertise standing before him. The quiet hum of the building's ventilation system filled the brief pauses between her statements, the faint background noise contrasting with the focused intensity of the room, emphasizing the gravity of the analysis being presented. Aisha's eyes briefly scanned the faces of her colleagues, noting reactions, understanding the unspoken questions, and addressing potential objections before they were voiced, a testament to her thorough preparation and insight. As she moved to the final set of charts, highlighting the most critical areas for immediate attention, the light in the room shifted slightly with the afternoon sun, reflecting off the polished surfaces, adding an almost cinematic glow to her methodical exposition. Her voice remained steady and confident, each word deliberate, conveying authority and knowledge without arrogance, allowing the data and her clear articulation to command attention naturally. The executives leaned in, some exchanging quick glances that conveyed recognition of the thoroughness and accuracy of her work, a subtle acknowledgement that the analysis provided insights they had not fully considered. Robert's hands rested on the table, his fingers lightly tapping as he absorbed the information, the slight movement indicating contemplation rather than agitation. Aisha concluded this section with a concise summary of the potential impacts and the recommended actions, her tone even and measured, leaving space for reflection and processing by the leadership team. The silence that followed was dense, filled with the weight of understanding and the realization that the young analyst had presented not just numbers, but a well-structured argument that demanded recognition and careful consideration. The sunlight now angled through the windows highlighted the sharp focus in her eyes, the subtle determination in her posture, and the calm confidence with which she had navigated the complexities of corporate projections, transforming what could have been a routine presentation into a moment of quiet authority and undeniable competence that held the attention of everyone in the room. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly, a quiet tension threading through the air as Aisha Carter watched the reactions of the senior executives, noting the small, almost imperceptible changes in posture, the narrowing of eyes, and the slight frowns that accompanied their careful consideration of the numbers she had presented. Robert Hayes straightened in his chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him, his hands clasped together on the polished table, and for the first time in the morning, his confident smirk faltered just slightly, replaced with a measured, contemplative expression. The hum of the air conditioning and the soft click of pens were now the only sounds accompanying the profound silence that seemed to have settled over the boardroom. Each member processing the implications of the meticulously detailed financial analysis displayed across the projection screen. Aisha remained composed, her posture upright, shoulders relaxed but commanding presence undeniable, as her gaze swept across the room, ensuring that every individual understood not just the accuracy of her findings, but the significance of the potential consequences if the anomalies were ignored. Robert's eyes flicked to the highlighted sections of the report once more, lingering on the numbers that contradicted his initial assumptions, the subtle shift in his expression betraying a rare moment of acknowledgement that the analysis was not only thorough but insightful, revealing aspects he had not fully considered despite years of experience. The junior analysts and associates seated around the table exchanged quiet glances, their whispers held in check by the sheer authority of Aisha's calm, yet commanding presentation, realizing that the balance of power in this room had momentarily shifted from title and tenure to knowledge and preparation. She moved seamlessly through the next set of data, her finger tracing a particular trend line on the projection, illustrating the cumulative impact of overlooked expenses and the projected deviation from the expected outcomes if corrective measures were not taken, her voice steady, articulate, and unflinching, carrying the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours understanding every variable and outcome in meticulous detail. The sunlight streaming through the windows now caught the edges of the charts, reflecting soft patterns onto the polished wood surface of the conference table, creating a quiet visual emphasis on the precision and clarity of the information being presented, highlighting the contrast between youthful diligence and established authority. Robert leaned slightly forward, resting one elbow on the table as he absorbed each detail, his expression shifting gradually from skepticism to a recognition of the careful thought and expertise demonstrated, the faintest crease of surprise crossing his brow as he processed the implications of the analysis before him. Aisha maintained eye contact with him and the other executives, her demeanor steady and unwavering, allowing the gravity of her findings to resonate without the need for elevated tone or dramatic gesture, exemplifying the power of knowledge communicated with clarity and confidence. The executives nodded slowly, some exchanging subtle signals of agreement, the silent acknowledgement of her competence beginning to ripple through the room, each subtle movement a reflection of their dawning recognition that Aisha's contribution was not just correct but crucial to the decision-making process. The air in the room, still filled with the quiet hum of activity, seemed to hold a different weight, a mixture of respect, apprehension, and acknowledgement, as each person present contemplated the significance of the analysis and the audacity of the young executive who had challenged assumptions and illuminated truths with methodical precision. Aisha's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table as she concluded her current point, allowing a moment of silence to settle in, letting the data speak for itself, her posture and composure reinforcing the undeniable credibility she had established in this room of seasoned professionals. Robert Hayes shifted slightly, the subtle movement a physical indication of his processing, a reconsideration of previous judgments, and a tacit acknowledgement of the unexpected depth of insight presented by Aisha, whose calm confidence and meticulous preparation had successfully brought attention to matters that could not be overlooked, commanding respect without a word of confrontation, asserting authority through knowledge and precision alone, demonstrating the profound effect that expertise, clarity, and careful presentation could have even in a space dominated by established power and expectation. The room settled into a quiet rhythm as Aisha Carter leaned back slightly in her chair, allowing the intensity of the earlier discussion to give way to a moment of reflection. Sunlight filtered through the expansive windows, scattering soft golden beams across the polished mahogany table and illuminating the subtle lines of concentration on her face. The executives remained seated, each absorbed in thought, their attention anchored by the precision and clarity of her presentation. Outside, the city moved with its usual unrelenting pace, cars glinting in the sun, distant sirens muted by the walls of glass, a contrast to the calm but charged atmosphere within. Aisha's fingers lightly traced the edge of her laptop, a tactile reminder of the careful preparation she had undertaken, the countless hours of analysis, cross-referencing, and verification that had led to this exact moment. The soft hum of the projector and the faint tapping of pens provided a subtle soundtrack to the silent acknowledgement growing among the board members. Robert Hayes, seated at the head of the table, allowed his gaze to soften slightly, the furrow between his brows easing as he processed the thoroughness and accuracy of the data laid before him. The tension in his posture eased imperceptibly, a testament to the impact of Aisha's calm, methodical approach. Each chart, each numerical annotation, each highlighted cell spoke with authority, demanding recognition without a single raised voice or confrontational gesture. The executives shifted in their seats, some leaning forward to get a better view of the data, others exchanging subtle nods and glances that indicated a quiet consensus forming around the validity of Aisha's findings. She maintained her poise, her gaze steady, allowing the room to absorb the information fully, knowing that patience and precision carried more weight here than urgency or volume ever could. The sunlight danced across her polished shoes and the smooth surface of her briefcase, emphasizing the composed professionalism as she projected, a presence both commanding and understated. Aisha's mind, while calm on the surface, remained alert, attuned to the nuances of body language, the subtle reactions of each board member, the shifts in energy that reflected understanding, doubt, or acknowledgement. The soft ticking of the wall clock punctuated the silence, each second stretching, emphasizing the deliberate pace of reflection and the weight of the decisions being considered. She adjusted the angle of her chair slightly, a small, almost imperceptible motion that aligned her with the projection screen, ensuring that every data point remained clear and accessible to the room. Robert Hayes' gaze lingered on the numbers longer than necessary, the careful scrutiny betraying a growing appreciation for the depth of analysis presented, a recognition of the diligence and expertise of the young executive before him. Aisha allowed the silence to linger, not as a pause in the presentation, but as a deliberate moment, giving space for comprehension, allowing the executives to reconcile the discrepancy between expectation and evidence, between authority and insight. The light shifted as the sun moved across the sky, casting elongated shadows across the table, creating a visual metaphor for the subtle power dynamics at play, highlighting the balance between established status and emergent competence. Every detail of her demeanor, the steady gaze, the controlled breathing, the confident yet unassuming posture, reinforced the gravity of the information and her rightful place in the room as a professional whose skill and judgment warranted attention. The quiet acknowledgement among the executives was tangible, an unspoken validation of her capability, a recognition that authority could be complemented and, in certain instances, guided by knowledge, insight, and meticulous preparation. Aisha remained present, fully aware of the moment's significance, the intersection of her preparation, expertise, and composure creating a resonance that extended beyond numbers and charts, a subtle yet undeniable assertion of competence and credibility that anchored the room in focused reflection and emerging respect. Robert Hayes slowly leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly, and for the first time in the day, his confident demeanor softened, a flicker of genuine respect passing across his features as he looked at Aisha Carter. The other executives remained still, their attention riveted by the quiet shift in authority as the weight of the detailed analysis settled across the room. Aisha's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, her fingers slightly splayed, and her eyes met Robert's with a calm steadiness that spoke volumes without a single raised voice. The sunlight shifted across the polished conference table, reflecting softly on the bar graphs and numerical highlights of the projection screen, illuminating the precision of her work and the subtle power of meticulous preparation. Robert's hands moved slowly to clasp together on the tabletop, his gaze lingering on the highlighted cells that indicated potential discrepancies, his expression now thoughtful rather than skeptical, a silent acknowledgement of the validity of her insights. The room seemed to hold its breath as the board members shifted in their seats, the faint rustle of papers and tapping of pens the only sounds, creating a rhythmic underscore to the moment of recognition. Aisha remained composed, her posture poised, shoulders relaxed yet commanding, allowing her presence and the weight of her expertise to guide the room without a word of confrontation. Robert's eyes followed the path of her hand as she traced trends and projections, noting the precision and clarity with which she had prepared her materials, and for the first time, he allowed a quiet nod to accompany his appraisal, subtle yet unmistakable. The executives exchanged tentative glances, their previous skepticism giving way to a subdued acknowledgement of her capability, the room settling into a new dynamic where competence and preparation outweighed the customary hierarchy of title and tenure. Aisha's voice broke the stillness as she summarized her recommendations, calm and measured, each word deliberate, reinforcing the rationale behind her analysis and providing a clear path forward that left little room for doubt or misinterpretation. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, creating gentle reflections across the room that seemed to accentuate the clarity and focus of the moment, highlighting Aisha's composed determination and the impact of her methodical approach. Robert's expression softened further, the tension easing from his shoulders, a quiet respect evident in his careful observation of her work, recognizing that the young analyst's insight had illuminated areas that had been overlooked despite years of experience. The executive's reactions became more relaxed, subtle nods and quiet acknowledgments marking the acceptance of her findings, a shared understanding that the merit of her analysis had earned its place and deserved consideration in the decision-making process. Aisha remained the center of focus, not through force or volume, but through the undeniable weight of her preparation and the accuracy of her presentation, her presence a testament to the power of knowledge and composure. The gentle hum of the ventilation system, the occasional soft tap of a pen, and the distant city sounds outside the glass walls created a quiet backdrop to the transformative moment in the conference room, where authority and recognition had shifted subtly yet significantly, anchored by clarity, insight, and the poised professionalism of a young executive whose expertise commanded attention and respect in a space traditionally dominated by hierarchy. Robert Hayes finally allowed a slow, deliberate exhale to escape, the faint creak of his chair the only audible indication of movement in the still room as he absorbed the full implications of Aisha Carter's meticulous presentation. The afternoon sunlight angled through the large windows, glinting off the polished surfaces of the conference table and casting soft, elongated shadows across the room, emphasizing the weight and significance of the moment. Aisha remained poised, her hands lightly resting on the edge of the table, shoulders squared, eyes calm and focused, conveying confidence without confrontation, allowing the facts and her unwavering expertise to command recognition naturally. Robert's gaze softened as he studied the highlighted numbers, the careful cross-references, and the detailed annotations that had revealed inconsistencies and potential pitfalls in the proposed merger strategy, his previous skepticism giving way to a quiet acknowledgement of her competence. The other executives, who had initially leaned toward hesitation and doubt, now leaned forward subtly, some nodding ever so slightly, others exchanging brief glances of agreement, a tacit understanding forming that the young analyst's insight carried both authority and accuracy that could not be ignored. The ambient sounds of the office, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the gentle tapping of pens, the muted whispers of junior staff outside the glass walls, created a calm backdrop that contrasted with the intensity of the realization settling among the leadership team. Aisha's eyes met Robert's, steady and unwavering, conveying a sense of composed integrity, a silent assertion that her thorough preparation and professional diligence had earned rightful acknowledgement in the decision-making process. Sunlight danced across her polished shoes and the surface of her briefcase, casting reflections that mirrored the clarity and precision of her analysis, subtly reinforcing her command over the information she had so carefully assembled. Robert shifted his hands slightly, allowing them to rest on the table in a more relaxed position, the tension in his posture easing, his expression transitioning from guarded to one of contemplative recognition, as if reconciling his long-held assumptions with the undeniable evidence presented before him. The executives around the table absorbed the scene in quiet reflection, their subtle gestures and measured nods signaling an unspoken respect for the rigor and insight Aisha brought to the discussion. The balance of power momentarily reshaped not by authority alone, but by clarity, intelligence, and meticulous execution. Aisha continued to maintain her composure, offering concise responses to occasional clarifying questions, her voice calm, articulate, and even, each word reinforcing the integrity and reliability of her findings, creating an atmosphere where respect and recognition arose naturally from competence. The projection screen glowed softly, illuminating the detailed charts and graphs that had guided the presentation, the sunlight shifting gradually across the room, highlighting the deliberate precision in her slides and the thoughtful engagement of those present. Robert's gaze lingered on the final summary, his posture relaxed but attentive, the faintest hint of a nod acknowledging the depth and accuracy of the insights she had provided. The executive's subtle interactions, quiet acknowledgement, and measured responses reflected the transition from doubt to acceptance, the room collectively recognizing that Aisha's analysis was both critical and reliable, deserving careful consideration in the company's next steps. Aisha sat with measured calm, allowing the silence to convey the weight of her contribution, her presence radiating professional assurance and quiet authority, demonstrating that expertise, preparation, and ethical diligence could command respect and affect change even in spaces dominated by entrenched hierarchy. The soft illumination from the projection and the shifting sunlight created a serene, almost cinematic frame around the young executive, emphasizing the triumph of knowledge and integrity over assumption and convention, a moment suspended in focus and acknowledgement that underscored the lasting impact of meticulous preparation and professional poise. The sunlight had begun to shift lower in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the polished mahogany floor of the conference room, creating a serene, almost cinematic glow that seemed to pause time itself as Aisha Carter collected her materials and prepared to leave. Her posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, hands steady, and eyes reflecting a quiet confidence born of rigorous preparation and unwavering professionalism. The executives lingered in their chairs, some flipping through the printed reports she had provided, others staring at the projection screen one last time, their expressions a mixture of reflection and subdued admiration. Robert Hayes remained at the head of the table, his chair slightly reclined, hands resting lightly on the polished surface, eyes following Aisha's subtle movements as she began to gather her laptop and folders, the soft rustle of papers punctuating the stillness. The atmosphere in the room was layered with unspoken acknowledgement, a recognition of competence and thoroughness that required no words, only the quiet validation that comes from witnessing precision, diligence, and clarity in action. Aisha stood, adjusting the strap of her briefcase over her shoulder, the soft shine of her polished shoes catching the angled sunlight as she walked slowly toward the glass doors, each step deliberate, measured, and in perfect sync with the composed confidence she carried throughout the day. The room's reflections danced across the sleek surfaces, casting subtle patterns on the walls and floor, mirroring the quiet triumph of knowledge and preparation prevailing in a space dominated by hierarchy and authority. Robert Hayes finally moved, his chair gliding softly across the carpeted floor as he stood, allowing a deliberate pause that gave weight to the unspoken respect and acknowledgement he now extended, his gaze lingering on Aisha, as if committing the lesson of the day to memory. The other executives followed suit, some quietly standing, offering nods or brief gestures of appreciation, the subtle language of recognition that underscored the shift in perception and the soft recalibration of respect across the room. Aisha reached the door, pausing momentarily to look back, the sunlight catching the soft lines of her expression, highlighting determination, intelligence, and the quiet power of someone who had earned her place through skill and integrity rather than title alone. The city outside continued its steady rhythm, traffic moving along sunlit streets, distant sounds of life filtering faintly through the building, a stark contrast to the deliberate, almost suspended atmosphere within, where each action and gesture carried significance and conveyed the lasting impact of the exchange. As she pushed open the glass door and stepped into the corridor, the gentle echo of her footsteps filled the space, a rhythm of measured confidence that resonated through the hallway. The soft clatter of the briefcase, touching her side, punctuating each step. The sunlight along the corridor walls created elongated reflections that seemed to accompany her movement, a visual metaphor for the subtle authority and respect she had established through patience, preparation, and an unwavering commitment to precision. Robert remained at the head of the table, the quiet hum of contemplation surrounding him as he processed the implications of the day's presentation, his gaze tracing the path Aisha had taken toward the elevators, a lingering acknowledgement of the skill, integrity, and composure that had quietly transformed the room. The executives around the table settled back into their chairs, the air still charged with subtle reflection, each taking a final moment to internalize the insights and the silent demonstration of competence that had so effectively reshaped perception and earned recognition without a single raised voice or overt demand for attention. Aisha's figure moved steadily toward the elevator, a composed silhouette framed by the late afternoon sunlight, her shadow stretching across the polished floor, embodying the quiet culmination of preparation, knowledge, and the unwavering poise that had defined the entire sequence of the day's events. The soft click of the elevator doors closing marked the gentle conclusion of the moment within the room, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with acknowledgement, respect, and the subtle understanding that authority is not merely a function of title, but of insight, integrity, and the courage to present truth with clarity and confidence, a quiet victory solidified in the echoes of professional poise and measured expertise.